Thank you so much. Dallas, Texas. All right, where were we? I came up with this title this morning, Ghost in the Machine of DevOps Past. And does anyone know this reference, Ghost in the Machine? So the original use of it, well, first this is a summary of what I think you see in a lot of DevOps talks and also a lot of pick a buzzword, you'll see this. So for every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. So I think that's the root cause for a lot of things. So the ghost of the machine comes from this concept of mind, published in 1949. So a lot of the things I'm going to reference today come from 1940s, 1950s, up into the 80s, and then we'll get to some DevOps stuff. So he's critiquing the dualism that regarded mind and body as separate, so two separate things. We're going to come back to that. But it also took on a life of its own, and in popular culture, Ghost of the Machine started referencing this shifting relationship between humans and machines, particularly humans anthropomorphizing machines. I don't know if anyone uses pronouns when they talk to ChatGPT at this point, or Alexa, whatever. And then also the machines are becoming progressively more human. So this is this fabric that we're seeing transform as we go. This is an alternative title to what we're going to talk about today. Learn socio-technical systems the hard way. Does anyone use this term, socio-technical systems? No one? I mean, how many DevOps talks have you guys watched? Girls too. What about, I mean, I see this in people calling platform engineering, observability, whatever. It's a term. You're going to learn what it means today. Just for a show of hands, does anyone work in a place or is part of a DevOps team? Does anyone have a title SRE? Does anyone work someplace where there's a DevOps team separate from an SRE team? That's awesome. How about platform engineering? Did anyone change their title to that yet? There you go. All right. So then another alternative title is what 1950s coal mining and 1980s car manufacturing can teach us about AI adoption. So that's the beginning. Keep your arms and legs inside the ride at all times. I feel really sorry for the person who has to draw my gibberish, but we're going to get through it together. So a little story. I said this on stage in 2022 that I stole DevOps, and then that got put on a shirt that I have in my backpack from this conference. But I'm going to tell that joke again today with a little more context. So my background, I've sort of been at the triple point of open source, cloud computing, and kind of like agile DevOps methodologies. I was a co-founder of Puppet. Then I was part of an OpenStack startup that got sold to EMC. And then I worked on a bunch of Cloud Foundry and Spring projects for 5 years at Pivotal. And then worked on like Kubernetes and Ansible stuff for 3 years at Red Hat before I started my new venture. In parallel to that, I've been part of organizing DevOps days since really started, argue in 2008 when I met Patrick Dubois at an Agile conference and wrote some books and been part of these communities. So that's fun. I started a new little adventure with some friends. We call it Ergonautic, and we have fun. And if you think some of these ideas are interesting or want help with any of this, then hook me up on LinkedIn, we'll talk about it. So this is the album cover, the crew. We focus on how people work. So with that, we'll go to this. I invented DevOps. You're welcome. But that's silly. I actually, when someone says that, I get embarrassed. Like sometimes people say that. Especially embarrassing when someone your employer starts saying that. It's like, ugh. Because I did not invent DevOps. I stole it. I stole it from my friends. So there's a little bit of that story. And this is the most actionable advice you're going to find today. Good DevOps copy, great DevOps steal. Wherever you find good ideas, take them. So this is a representative from some slides. You can go watch this talk online, actually, from Velocity 2009. It is John Allspaw and Paul Hammond talking about doing 10 deploys per day at Flickr. I'm in the audience. This is the dev and ops conflict, dev and ops divide. You have Spock and you have Scotty doing their thing, and it's really fun. Good time. This is like, in some ways, I think Velocity Conference was the first DevOps conference, but that's a longer thread. So I'm there tweeting, as one does, the artist formerly known as Twitter. You know, this is what John Allspaw said on stage. Don't just say no, you aren't respecting other people's problems. And I tagged it with DevOps, which I made in the moment, because that was what the title of the talk was. I made a bunch of them. You can see the date, June 3rd, 2009. You can go look at this. And I'd already been planning with Patrick for some ideas. We were calling like agile infrastructure. So he'd written a little paper about using kind of agile methodologies for system administrators, and I was working on doing like a bunch of talks on agile infrastructure, and you can talk to John Willis or any of these other people about the exciting times, and he's like, we're calling it DevOps days the next day, the next morning after he read all those tweets. It's like DevOps days, that's what we're calling it. So just for context, this is probably the most misquoted in all DevOps conversations, this idea you build it, you run it. So buried in this, in the middle, you see you build it, you run it. This is the full quote from this Werner Vogel's interview in 2006. And I won't read all of it today, but he's basically arguing that in the old way, you have this wall between the two and you throw it over the wall. And then not at Amazon, you don't do that. And then what most people miss is this feedback loop. That's what he thought was important, is that you have a feedback loop. We're going to revisit this quote later, so we'll just move forward to 2007. In 2007, this was written originally by Jesse Robbins. I wrote a follow-up in 2010, which is also good. You could go, I think they might have taken this, the radar down because O'Reilly's having a moment, but the 2007 argument of Jesse Robbins, who goes on to be a founder at Chef, but he's currently working at Amazon when this was written, talking about the secret sauce of startups is operations. And in 2007, which is kind of the golden age of Puppet or Puppet's coming up, he's arguing that on the left, you have traditional operations doing all this work, and on the right, you have these new tools that let you control configuration, and you don't have as much work as you scale up. That's 2007. The tools are way better now. We should be able to do even better, way better than 2007. So this is me, 2008, before DevOps is a word, talking about agile infrastructure, what I was calling agile infrastructure, putting up the wall of confusion between dev and ops, talking about how they don't even see each other as human. They only communicate through ticket systems, which makes people unhappy or worse. Some of you might work there now. So 2009, we wrote this book. Agile Infrastructure is a chapter in the Web Operations book from O'Reilly. Allspaw and Jesse Robbins are both on the cover as authors. Patrick Dubois, a bunch of other people. Eric Ries, who wrote Lean Startups, actually written the chapter. There's a bunch of good stuff in there. And I feel like the Agile Infrastructure chapter I wrote really stood up. You could go check it out. Anyway, there's me and Patrick. Patrick likes to call himself a Jedi. I might be a Sith, but what are you going to do? So I'm going to say 2006, which is when Amazon launched EC2. Everything before that is BC. And then everything after 2009 is after DevOps, and there's those 3 mysterious years in between. But during this adventure, like, I never cared about the word. I didn't care about the word DevOps. I didn't care about the word Agile. I just cared about trying to win. I just want to be part of winning. So I was looking for a technical advantage, and if you know what that reference is, then you've actually watched my talks before. If you want to waste 45 minutes of your life, go search for "there is no talent shortage," and you can see that over and over. And then you can send me a note on LinkedIn and tell me, how silly I am. So this is another slide from me in 2014, talking about how DevOps represents patterns that emerge from high-performing organizations that deliver highly available applications continuously at scale. These things are all one, so this has most of the buzzwords of the time in 2014. So you have DevOps, you have microservices, you have continuous delivery, and I'm arguing those are inseparable. And it's kind of a mistake to think of those as separable. So that's the recurring theme of all this, is like you have these things that you want to treat as separate, but they're really one thing. So if you can deploy, operate code in any capacity, you have a platform. May not be a very good one. That's 2014, because the title of this talk was actually DevOps Platforms. 2014. No one originally set out to do DevOps, continuous delivery, microservice, or platforms. They were natural consequences of the Darwinian pressure to go faster and to scale. So don't worry about the words, worry about the outcomes, because you don't know what to copy. And then there's this period where people argued that we need a definition of DevOps, because if we just had a definition, then we'd know what to do. So this is my definition. Been using it for a while. It's optimizing the human experience and performance of operating software and with humans. Socio-technical. But what should we do? It depends, because I don't know, like I didn't look at your chessboard. I don't know what piece you should move. We don't know what to do. DevOps isn't prescriptive. And then 2016, the book came out from Google. They're like, this is how we do SRE, and everyone's like, we can't do that, because that's too prescriptive. And now we're like, oh, if we just change the words, then we can get funding to do the thing that we didn't do right last time. All right, sure. So we're going to continuously DevOps microserverless platforms with software and humans. It's like, blink tag. Now with more AI. Like, here we are again. So the first rule of buzzword bingo, marketing ruins everything. Don't worry, some of my best friends are marketers. So I used to think everything related to DevOps was obvious and said out loud by 2010. But now, I think everything related to DevOps was obvious and said out loud before I was born. So the next thread, we're going to go into some of that history. So my understanding, and influenced a lot of DevOps conversations I had from the very beginning, was Deming, Edward Deming. Anyone a fan of Deming? Anyone know Deming? Man, read the 14 points from Out of the Crisis. You could look him up on LinkedIn. It's amazing. So this is a Deming quote. We're going to get a couple more Deming quotes by the end. One gets a good rating for fighting a fire. The result is visible, can be quantified. If you do it right the first time, you are invisible. You satisfy the requirements, that is your job. Mess it up and correct it later, you become a hero. That sounds like half the ops departments in most enterprises. So during the Second War, Deming worked as a quality expert in armament plants throughout the United States. His approach helped produce higher quality products, raise productivity, and decrease costs. Deming's approach, he approached everything as an opportunity to improve the system. So he took a systemic view about how everything connected and flowed together, and he improved the system. Not the local improvement, the global improvement of the system. And then the war ended, and no one cared. So he had all the data. No one would listen to Deming in the US, America. Because what happened was, and this is in John's book, he just wrote a book about Deming, the war ends, and the people come back, the men come back, and they're like, that was good when the women were running the factories, but we're command and control all the way, baby, so we're not doing that. So that might have been the end of Deming. And we'll come back to Deming, because we're going to go to the 1950s in the coal mines of Britain. And this is the beginning of this term. So Trist is a researcher in London, and he's credited with coining, so he's at the Tavistock Institute. He coins the term socio-technical systems, studying the mechanization of coal mining in the 50s. So the socio-technical theory, like one sentence definition, is that the quality of any organizational system can only be understood and improved if social and technical are both considered as interdependent parts of a single system. And then, because I have nothing better to do, I did this gratuitous naive search this morning for socio-technical systems in Dallas, and the first thing that came up, and it's 2022, I skimmed through the paper, I didn't read all of it yet, but it's socio-technical innovation bundles for agri-food systems transformation. So like, still relevant, not just in tech, in like everything. Who eats? Does anyone eat food? Awesome. So the newly automated long-wall mining was predicted to be much more productive than short-wall mining. So this is the Tavistock Institute studying the mining. And but it turns out the expected productivity did not develop as the model. The centralized planning did not work. So the longwall mining, the issue that comes up, and we'll get into a little bit more, is that each shift has a single task, and one shift was tasked with moving the conveyor belts, another with loading coal, and so on, which means no one saw the whole process. They only saw their individual task. So this is a comparison of what Trist's going to describe as short wall versus long wall mining. So the one on the right, we'll call it, continuously delivered microservices, where you have a bunch of cross-functional autonomous teams that are accommodating the anomalies in the rock wall, the coal face, and they're mining their bit and getting it to the transport system. So it's kind of like a full cycle, full stack mining, coal mining. And then on the right side, you have the automated thing that shaves off one layer of coal, and then that might take a while, and then the next shift is to come and clear the coal, and then the next shift is to come and remove the thing, and that's done over and over on this long wall. But it turns out that is not the best way. So this is right from Trist's writing. I'm not going to read the whole thing today, but he's comparing and contrasting what he describes as the bureaucracy of Taylorism fused with the bureaucracy of Weber fused with Frederick Taylor and what people call scientific management, which he doesn't think works very well, which I don't think works very well either. And then just the last sentence is, the cooperation between task groups was everywhere in evidence, personal commitment was obvious, absenteeism low, accidents infrequent, productivity high. Sounds great. So here's some principles he identified from 1950s coal mining. The work system, which comprised a set of activities that made up a functioning whole, now became the basic unit rather than the single jobs into which it was decomposable. So he's talking about basically a full stack team, a cross-functional team that could do all the work. And then correspondingly, the work group became central rather than the individual job holder, the task. And then this made it possible for the internal regulation of the system by the group, thus rendered possible rather than the external regulation of individual by supervisor. So it's that autonomous, empowered team. And then this is interesting, maybe the longest one here. I'll just go to the middle. So characterize the underlying organizational philosophy that tended to develop multiple skills in the individual and immensely increase the response repertoire of the group. So like you could do more with the same people. This principle valued the discretionary rather than the prescribed part of the work roles. I have a theory, I believe is true, that if every person in an organization only did their job, their prescribed job, the organization would fall apart. That all organizations are held together, where you're talking about, whatever fast food restaurant to the highest tech, pick a company, if everyone just did, quote unquote, their job, that organization will fall apart. So number 6, this new way has treated the individual as complementary to the machine rather than as an extension of it. And last principle is, it was variety increasing for both the individual and the organization rather than variety decreasing in the bureaucratic mode. So that's just dry writing, someone studying coal mines in the 1950s. And then this is a little summary of what he's talking about as the old paradigm versus the new paradigm. So I'll just pick 3 of these. So the top one, he's talking about the old way is the technological imperative, focus on the tools, versus the new way is the joint optimization. We'll skip down to the middle. The old way is a tall organization with the autocratic style. The new way is a flat organization with a participative style. Such a new idea. And then at the very bottom, the old paradigm is low risk taking, and the new paradigm is innovation. 1950s coal mining. Innovation. Increased productivity, higher morale, and better safety. Who wouldn't want that? Who wants that? We want it, right? Turns out no one. So what happens is I'll just get to the middle. The divisional board did not wish attention drawn to it. They feared the power change that would be consequent on allowing groups to become more autonomous at a time when they themselves were intent on intensifying managerial controls in order to accelerate the full mechanization of the mines. It's like, data? No, we don't care. We're doing it. We have a plan. So within a year or two, the conventional system reinstated itself. And then I'm going to skip to the very bottom. There's a sense which I think is related to some of the stuff we see. This broke up the unity of the face groups, which were further decimated when bonuses were introduced for various classes of workers. Like you get paid more to do Kubernetes. Within a year or two, the conventional system reinstated itself. Granting more autonomy was not popular. And then this really got erased because the energy markets shifted from, or like the new thing was oil. So then they were like, you know, that's for coal mining. Let's just ignore that. We're oil now. So the other thing, these innovations, if they are created in bubbles, this is from some of his later work too, it became evident that innovations in work organization based on principles different from those on conventional bureaucratic organizations were not likely to survive for long unless the organization as a whole changed in the new direction, right? So if you create a little special way of doing business and it like might get some results, but it's just going to get washed away at some point. This is timeless. And I think it gets washed away from this, so Brian thinks in the audience right here, I love this quote. The key metric for your DevOps transformation is the mean time to leadership change. Because we're whatever that other person did, we're done with that. So going back to Deming, now we're going to skip to the 80s. So the only reason we know of Deming is because he went to Japan. So Japan had this little thing they needed to rebuild from. And this is a 1980s documentary where Deming's talking about stuff that happened in Japan's management, and he makes this quote. You can go watch this whole video on YouTube if you want. But this is a screenshot from that video saying, I think that people here expect miracles. American management thinks they can just copy from Japan, but they don't know what to copy. They don't know what to copy, I think summarizes a lot of the DevOps confusion in the market over the last 15 years. So just for the sake of completeness, if there was no Deming, there would have been no Toyota, there would have been no Lean, and there would have been no DevOps, period, full stop. So the American executives went to Japanese factories, and they saw the robots, but they couldn't comprehend what was happening, and they thought the Japanese were actually hiding the truth, that they were lying to them. They thought they were putting a pageant because their mental model could not conceive of the just-in-time delivery that the Japanese had started to employ, because their whole model, their whole mental model of how they build cars is managing this massive backlog of inventory. That's just like how American manufacturing did it. So when they didn't see all these cars in lots, they were like, they're lying to us. But they decided to copy the robots. So in 1980s money, GM spent $45 billion. So the quote here is eye-popping, $45 billion in capital investment. And despite that spending, its global market share rose but a single percentage point to 22%. For the same amount of money, we could buy Toyota and Nissan outright, which would have essentially doubled their market share to 40%. So they spent all this money on robots. It didn't work out because it's exactly the same as the coal mine. Quality suffered because instead of making flawless cars, workers simply did their assigned jobs. Workers had no big picture goal of building cars together to motivate them. Everyone did their job. Everyone ran their robot. You didn't get a good outcome. And then this is a quote from a GM executive in the same kind of, you can go into the rabbit hole if you want to and read all these things, but focusing on the technical without accounting for the socio never goes very well. The GM executive says, all you do is automate the confusion. Who's with me? Did anyone do this yet? Anyone ever try this? I did this before. Sorry. What it's really about to me is optimizing work, and optimizing work is about smoothing the boundaries between tasks and teams. Getting this global optimization is not about the local optimization of the task, and that has to do with structures, tools, and the stories that we tell each other. We have to see ourselves in the big picture, and we have to see ourselves as a hero. And then we also have in our cultures, I think, a tendency to try to avoid conflicts, when all the magic really happens from productive conflict, where you have these ongoing negotiations to establish the common ground and get those shared practices to emerge based on your context. So sometimes people talk about DevOps and they're like, everyone should just do everything. I never thought that was a good idea. This certainly doesn't scale. What I do think, though, is everyone should understand that the others contribute value to the outcome. And now we're going to talk a little bit about this negotiation. So this is like my ergonomic propaganda. These ideas are related to Jabe, my co-founder's PhD research. And I fell in love with this a while ago as a way to kind of frame vocabulary around like the core conflict of DevOps. So what Jabe talks about is this tension between innovation and efficiency. And in his parlance, the three economies, the tension is between what he calls the differentiation economy and the scale economy. So you're trying to get innovation on one side and efficiency, or like you can think of these as two different games. So on the scale economy, trying to drive down costs, it's really good for managing things that get consumed. On the differentiation economy, you're trying to enter new markets, do these things, so it's about making stuff, generating stuff. So this core conflict happens. It has nothing to do with tech, actually. Like if you're trying to do any sort of manufacturing, you have this tension between these two things. And that plays out at an individual level between a dev and ops person, but also plays out at organizational level between the BU who wants to go get more customers, do things fast, enter new markets, do them differently, reinvent, innovate, whatever. And then IT ops, central IT has all this pressure to control consumption and costs and do things in a standard way. So this is a core conflict, and we don't understand how we connect because we put this ticket system wall confusion in the middle. And then this is another Carnegie Mellon PhD who I fell in love with his research too. He works at Microsoft right now. And he uses this language, and he's not necessarily talking about what a lot of people would call a platform in like the Kubernetes container sense, but he's talking about this much bigger idea about platforms as a conceptual guiding principle to redefine two sides of a binary relationship that reveals the mass middle. So I'm going to try to explain this a little bit better in a minute, but platforms can help us recommon resource management through new approaches to negotiation. So we're going to keep coming back to negotiation between conflicting interests. So if you imagine the scale and the differentiation, this new third economy is the scope economy that's trying to balance those two and enable both. And scale is good at managing things that are destroyed by consumption, like the capacity of your network and computers. The scope economy is actually, you win that game the most, or as things get reused. Like the more people use the platform, the more valuable the platform is. So the way I think about this, or this kind of like a short introduction to recommenting, is that there are some things that begin as an innovation in some dev team that would probably be very valuable if it was being reused by everyone. So there's a recommenting exercise to bring that back into the platform and make that a self-service tool for everyone. And then you have resources that are maybe being overly restricted because you learned how to manage computers in the 50s and didn't change how you do anything since then. And it might be more valuable to make those resources be self-service in the platform. So it's bringing those two sides into the middle on some sensible negotiation. So this scope economy, this platform, emerges from an ongoing negotiation between the selfish interest in favor of the collective. DevOps, in my opinion, is from resolving this core conflict between these two tensions, and it's emerging from an ongoing negotiation between the selfish interest in favor of the collective. And last but not least, or no, that's coming back to this notion of the binary is really one. The platform should emerge from an ongoing negotiation between the selfish interest in favor of the collective. And if you're not careful, and some of you probably did this already, if you build it, they might run. Like, they won't come if it doesn't work for them. So you got to negotiate with them. Alternatively, or in relation to this, does anyone know the memo from Bezos, 2002? No, more history. So the memo, this is an example of leadership. We'll read the top. all teams will henceforth expose their data and functionality through service interfaces. Teams must communicate with each other only through these interfaces. So you can't do inter-process communication, no direct linking, whatever spaghetti mess we have now, we're not doing that anymore. And then the very end, we'll skip to that. Anyone who doesn't do this will be fired. Thank you. Have a nice day, Jeff Bezos. So that's 2002. So that's 4 years before the Werner Vogel's quote. And what emerges, and I think this pattern is kind of credited to a lot of Amazon, but it really emerged in a lot of the big web companies. Every big web company, and like circa 2008, 2007, or even earlier, like Puppet was being used in a bunch of like places where they could provision things in their data center with the API. It just wasn't productized, right? So Amazon productized it in a way, but the kind of like baseline to be able to manage systems at any scale was to get API-driven stuff. So we'll call that bottom layer infrastructure as a service to provision compute networking storage. Above that, you start to be able to do things like provision databases, monitoring. There's leaking from the ceiling. Awesome. And that's also software. And then everyone wants to be able to manage software as a service. But I think there's 2 points I want to make with this. So this is conveniently the NIST definitions of cloud computing, but each layer of this is software, and each layer of software needs to be developed and operated, right? Like a lot of times you hear these like platform people are like, we're going to develop a platform, but it's like new software, you got to operate it too. And it's different than operating the software, right? So when you talk about Werner Vogel's, which we'll come to in a minute, each one of these layers has its own life cycle. And if your life cycle is too coupled, then you're not going to get the benefit of this. Like you have this shearing pace layer effect, which I'll talk about in a minute. So you build it, you run it. The most misquoted, most misunderstood quote is Werner Vogel's talking about running the top layer. Because at that point in 2006, they already have APIs to provision infrastructure as a service. They already have APIs to provision managed lifecycle database. They already have like all this stuff. So he's not talking about developers needing to build their OS and like build their networks and build their storage. He's talking about the very, very top layer. And that's a model that emerged. It's actually the way Google works until you earn the right to have SREs. So everyone wants to run software when they really haven't solved their platform problem or their infrastructure problem. And in what I see right now is everyone's like, well, we'll just make a new silo for the platform and pretend the infrastructure doesn't exist because we will spend all the money that we don't have on Amazon. Is anyone moving back to the data center yet? That's a good one. So all these things have different paces, and if you're not mindful about that and created nice decoupling, then those pace layers can create turbulence and shearing. And it goes back to that need for the ongoing negotiation. And the way I think about this, and this is another duality, is the socio-technical learning loops, where on one side you kind of have your beliefs and behaviors. I stopped talking about culture because I think that's too ambiguous, but I can get concrete with behaviors. Like we should do these behaviors. It's much easier for people to understand and internalize and tell them, your culture's bad. You got to change your culture. And then there's the doing. So you have skills and tools. So this is being and doing. Being is doing. And these feedback on itself. So if you can get people to get new behaviors, you get new beliefs, you get new tools, new skills. If you just focus on that bottom tools thing and you don't get new skills or new beliefs, you're probably not going to have a good time. So this learning is happening across every level in your organization. You have that loop with new tools, new information, new beliefs. The CTO read the article with the buzzwords. And then this is what I like to talk about. This is related to what I call delamination and disintegration, or disconnects, right? So if you have disconnects between leaders, managers, and practitioners, I call that delamination. And then if you have disconnects between capabilities, I call that disintegration. So if your devs don't work with your ops, that's an example of disintegration. If you have what I call a watermelon report, where the executives think everything is green, but everyone at the bottom thinks everything is red. That's a watermelon. And it's like, does anyone work there? Some nods. So I try to get people to think about, okay, like what do we need to communicate? What narratives do we need? On what timeline? What's the cadence that we need to synchronize our metrics so that we are on the same page and we're doing the right thing? And this is an example of what we like to think about in our socio-technical alignment, is that you have directional alignment from the top. You know, there's a decree, but if there's not a good feedback loop to clarify that intent, then the chance that you're going to have watermelon reports is going to go up. And then to me, I think the key when you're really seeing it work, and I think this is definitely related to DevOps, but we can extend it to all the other capabilities in our organization, which, you know, a lot of us don't have the luxury of only working on big web apps and needing to like integrate with things that are real. So it's a good idea to have that peer level lateral agreement between the capabilities in an organization. So coming to the end of this story, if this was easy, everyone would be good at DevOps right now. Who's good at DevOps? Who wants some DevOps? Everyone wants DevOps. Here's what you really want. Here's what most organizations really want. Usability, scalability, availability, reliability, observability, operability, securability. If there's some more ilities you can come up with, throw them in there too. We want it all for free without changing anything. And then I just think the best way to make a point is just make the text big. That's the key in a lot of DevOps transformations, unfortunately. Or as I like to say, you get the DevOps you deserve. And then here's another thing when you're going to take on one of these little transformation projects. You got to understand the performance almost always goes down before going up. And if you've ever tried to be good at anything in your life as an individual, you see that. If you try to be good at music, try to be good at a sport, you go to practice, you try to get a new skill, I want to shoot this way, or golf swing, whatever, you go through this J curve where the performance goes down before it goes back up. And if I won't read this little eye chart here, but basically you change something and then there's some potential resistance. And if you're not careful, you have these opportunities to spiral out of control. And if you work in a place where there's political opportunities to hold that against you, then like maybe you're never going to get back up the other side and get to that new goodness. Although if you work in certain places, you're going to declare victory anyway and like go on with the watermelon. And another thing related to this pattern, and I think this is why you see so many organizations adopt vocabulary without really changing the practices. And I live this with Agile, I live this watching DevOps, live this with SRE. How many people have SRE practices in the organization but no SLOs or production readiness reviews? So like, good job. So this is the pattern that you see. This is a very famous crossing the chasm thing. What you see is the innovators and early adopters, they're looking for that advantage. They're trying to win some game, that they have context, they're looking at the chessboard and trying to make the best move. They come up with the best move, they start to win, and that leads to that advantage. Because they were looking for an advantage, they got an advantage. And then what happens is Gartner or someone else starts making the buzzwords, and then those buzzwords permeate and that legitimizes the practice. So there's advantage seeking, legitimizes the practice, and then what happens, maybe the front lip of the early majority is advantage seeking. There is also death and destruction on this. They call it bleeding edge for a reason, right? So there might be some value to waiting, like watching, but the late adopters, for sure, they're not seeking an advantage, they're seeking legitimacy. And they're more than willing to just use the vocabulary and pretend like they're cool kids without changing anything. So you gotta understand that words cross these chasms before the understanding and practices do. We can't just copy. We don't know what to copy, but maybe the AI will save us. So don't forget, The newly automated longwall mining was predicted to be much more productive than shortwall mining. The expected productivity did not develop. This is about 8-9 weeks old now. 77% of surveyed employees say AI tools make them less productive. Good job. I'm all in on AI, by the way. It's good. It's sauce. But you can't just throw tools at the problem. This was from the very end of July. CIO canceled the Microsoft AI deal. That should worry the tech industry. And from that article, there's high cost, low value. Anyone play the ChatGPT slot machine, trying to get like good results? Change is hard. And I just think this picture is funny. I'll let you look at it for a minute. So another gratuitous Deming quote: a bad system will beat a good person every time. These two are not usually put together, but I'm going to put them together today. It is not necessary to change. Survival is not mandatory. Classic Deming. So parting thoughts. This isn't a technical problem. It isn't a people problem. You have to solve both as one problem. Deming and Trist both struggle to get accepted with all the data. So your struggles, just keep in mind, it's hard. And sometimes doing the right thing means you might have to stand alone. For now. The advice I got before is you change your organization or you change your organization. So, home stretch, land the plane, optimizing the human experience and performance of operating software with software and humans. Silly, pithy Andrew. Software, 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 software. Humans, 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 humans. Learning is the only sustainable advantage. I think that's going to get even crazier now that our socio-technical system, the other side of the equation, is learning and has agency. And you haven't learned anything until you change your behavior. So if you listen to me, you listen to all these people, and you got a bunch of vocabulary, but you don't go do anything different, you didn't learn anything. You just collected trivia for the day. Now go build something. Together. That's the end. I'm not here to answer questions. I'm here for conversations. Thank you, Dallas. So if anyone wants to find me in the hall or open space, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Andrew. Let's give it up for Andrew. Thanks, brother.
Thank you.
Appreciate it for being here.